Welcome back, everybody. In an earlier lecture, we spoke of the different types of conversations that you'll need to have as a service owner. If you remember, one of those types of conversations is the executive conversation. This topic about spending is almost always going to be in the top three, if not the top of interest for the executives. Your ability to do well in these conversations with executives could have a significant impact on your career. While this is a very important metric to get and to break down for your service, it's usually the most challenging one. Think about it for a minute if you haven't already. Total cost of a digital service is made up of software, hardware costs. Not bad so far. Then you get into the costs of people that are usually shared. And then you get into the cost of the buildings that the people are in and the assets that are stored. That's just scratching the surface. All these things have to be combined to roll up to that service. I brought up the Service Owner Workspace in several lectures now. This is the main scorecard for a service owner, and it's the same view that the executives will have access to if they drill in from a portfolio. The part that we want to focus on exclusively today is the estimated spend number. So let's make a few quick observations on this screen before we go further. Showing this entire block that I have highlighted now is optional. And the period underneath it is configurable. In this case, it's annual. The costs of the offerings come up to the service. So underneath you see those costs, the two lower ones, those bubble up to the service. Okay. The service costs also roll up to the portfolios. In this example, the $4.76 million spend from our email and calendaring service rolls up to collaboration software portfolio, where there may be several services under that portfolio. Those portfolio level metrics are usually what the executives will be looking at, but as I mentioned, they may drill down into your service to look at some of the detail. Now that's the simple part. The difficult part is how these numbers get there. We're specifically interested in how the service offering numbers get there, since we know that the upstream numbers are derived from the offerings numbers. I'm going to explain the options that I know of, but there's probably going to be others out there. I visited with an executive team, and I started to talk about the subject of financials. When I did that, the CIO got up and walked over to his bookcase, and he pulled out this book, and he dropped it on the table in front of me. It was 100 pages, roughly, and I quickly thumbed through the book because that's what he's insinuating, that I look at the book. And I noticed that on each of the pages they had their service listed and the total cost rolled up next to that service, and then underneath the service was a breakdown, just like the one we talked about, hardware, software, resources. So he had a firm that came in, and they were there for 3 to 4 months doing this assessment. They allocated all the costs from the IT department, or from the technologies in general. They allocated all those costs to the services. At first I was excited. I was like, wow, I finally have an idea of what excellent looks like, what it should be if we do this the right way. But on the other hand, I was disappointed because I thought as soon as they had finished, this is already outdated. So that's the first one, is people can come in and actually give you that number to work towards. These next two methods aren't popular, but they are possible, so I thought I would mention them. They're only possible if your organization is disciplined with task management. When I say task management, I mean operational task management, like incidents, problems, and changes. And they're also disciplined with strategic task management, like projects or agile user stories. What I mean by their discipline with them is that they can, for each of those tasks, it's mapped to a service or services that task is for. That's what the part that gets tough. Now, for the labor rate card, it gets even one step harder. For the labor rate card, it even gets one step of more difficulty. So first, all of your tasks must be mapped to the service offering. And second, you also have to have time cards implemented. So time cards must be implemented on each task. And then you can get to an hourly rate and use that as a proxy for the cost of the service. There is another way in ServiceNow to have models, and this is a different method where there's buckets at the bottom, buckets of costs, and they're allocated up to offerings through a series of steps, which I'll talk to you about in more detail on the next slide. And the last one I want to mention here out of the 5 that we're going to talk about today is you could do a full-blown technology business management solution. There are a number of services out there, people that specialize in financial management, as well as a number of products that specialize in financial management, and especially for IT or technology business allocations. One way to derive a cost is to use a model under the Service Owner Workspace that we've been showing, the one that we started this presentation with. The model starts with a known accurate number, and then it makes educated guesses and assumptions as you move up. Usually it's an assumption by committee. Maybe we know that in an organization we spend $100 million on technology. That's one way to start. What's even better is if you have all of the general ledger entries, line by line, you have all of the entries from the general ledger that we can bring in to start the model. And all of those line entries add up to that total cost. Either way, you have something solid to start with, a known good number. The next layer is to fully allocate the expense to cost buckets, like the ones that are shown here. Worst case, you have to have a committee decide which buckets those numbers fall in. Best case, the general ledger line items coding gives you that information. So when it comes in from the general ledger, it knows which bucket to go in. The next step is allocating to categories or resources that specific services need. Okay, this will get us closer to the type of resource that the service offerings require in order to run. And then the last step is determine how to allocate from those buckets, how to allocate up to the offerings. And there are a few ways you can do that. You can do it on a weighted basis, a percentage, or you can even hard code the dollar allocation. The nice part about this is that most of it can be automated. And that automated process can be invoked monthly, quarterly, yearly, whatever you want to do. That will keep you up to date, at least up to date at the point where the allocation is done. It doesn't take somebody 3 or 4 months every time they come in to redo those numbers for you. Accurate financials are elusive, especially for specific services in large organizations. But they are super important, especially for executives. If I were a service owner, like some of you are, and I was looking to be promoted, this is a topic that I would spend some time on to become an expert. Maybe even be the advisor that the executives look to for service costing. At a minimum, if you're not going to be the advisor or the expert in your organization, you should know what your options are. The 5 that I just listed are a good start. Number 2, you should learn about some of the specific vendors that specialize in this financial management area, especially around what you're doing with services and service offerings. And number 3, maybe even take some initiative to get involved with that TBM community that we mentioned earlier. That TBM standard and the TBM taxonomy can really get you some good perspectives on financial management. That was our final lecture for the Build a Process Data Model section of our course. Next, we're going to move into our Continuously Improve section. And what we're going to start with is how to measure the performance of your service.